Dear friends, welcome to the launch of the book, The Fajar Generation, edited by Dr. Posu Kai, Mr. Tan Ching Kui, and Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. This book is a collection of 14 articles written by the leading lights of the Socialist Club, and with a foreword from no other than Lee Kuan Yew. Following the defeat of the Japanese in the Second World War, the British reoccupied Malaya, and after a very brief interregnum, introduced the Malayan Union proposals, the effect of which was to split the British Malaya into two separate colonies, the Malayan Union and the Crown Colony of Singapore. This split was confirmed in the subsequent Federation of Malaya Agreement on February 1948. 4 months after the establishment of the Federation, the British unleashed a war against the Malayan Communist Party, declared a state of emergency throughout the two territories, and introduced the emergency regulations, the consequences of which we still feel today after more than 60 years. Following the introduction of the Malayan emergency, practically every opposition political party was banned. The Malayan Communist Party was driven to the jungle. The Malayan Nationalist Party, MNP, was banned, and the Malayan Democratic Union dissolved itself. Large-scale arrests and deportation and exile took place throughout the country. By the early 1950s, the British felt that the control of British Malaya was firm enough for them to begin the process of constitutional reform. In 1954, they introduced the General Constitution in Singapore. It is within this broad context of the historical developments after the war that the Socialist Club was born on February 1953. I would argue that 1954 was in effect the beginning of our constitutional struggle for freedom and independence. Consider this series of events. On the 10th of May 1954, Fajar, the organ of the United Socialist Club, published an editorial entitled "Aggression in Asia." This editorial did not specifically attack British colonial policies in Malaya and Singapore. In fact, the tone and substance of that editorial became the hallmark of what may be termed the Fajar style. It stated quite clearly and firmly that the struggle for freedom and independence in Malaya and Singapore was part of a wider struggle in the region and internationally. 3 days after the appearance of this editorial in Fajar, 1,000 students from 8 Chinese high schools gathered peacefully in the foothills of Fort Canning, then known as King George Street Park. They came in the school uniform and carrying with them nothing more offensive than banners declaring their opposition to this passing of the National Registration Ordinance. They were gathered there to support a delegation of 7 delegates representing the 8 Chinese high schools to present a petition to the British governor for exemption from national service. The police, who had cordoned off the area and were wearing baton and protective helmet, began to move in to break up the peaceful assembly. This led to a fracas, and many students were injured. These events took place on May 13, 1954, a day in which the Chinese students have come to know as Wu Yisan Sijian. And this took place by a coincidence and quite independently 3 days after the editorial of Fajar I mentioned earlier. The incident on the May 13 was the beginning of a long and sustained demonstration, including a month-long sitting and camping at the Chinese high school by the Chinese students. During this period, the trade union movement, who was then rising from the torpor of earlier years under the rising leadership of Lin Tin-siong and Fong Swee-suan, sent support by lorries to sustain the students in the campaign for the whole of this period. Five days after May 13, that is on the 18th of May 1954, the police took another dramatic action. They entered the grounds of the University of Malaya, then located at Bukit Timah campus, with the intention of arresting the entire editorial board of Fajar, who had been responsible for the publication of issue number 7, containing the article Aggression in Asia. They entered the universities in the early hours of the morning, on the very day when the students were supposed to take the final examinations. 7 of the students were arrested that morning. The 8th student Edwin Tambu, was not in the hostels at the time the police entered the campus. He was arrested in the afternoon when he in fact returned to the hostel. The entire editorial board of 8 were arrested and charged on the same day for sedition. This was the well-known sedition trial we knew and read about. The students read it behind the University Socialist Club at Fajar. Lim Hock Siew and Tan Seng Huat, now Dr. Lim Hock Siew and Professor Tan Seng Huat, headed a Fajar Defense Fund to collect donations to support the defense of the Fajar 8. A well-known international lawyer, D.N. Preet, offered his services to defend the Fajar 8. At about the same time, following the series of scuffles by the Chinese students, many students were arrested and released. But 7 of the student leaders from the Chinese middle schools were charged for rioting and convicted and sentenced to imprisonment. Through the intermediary of the University Socialist Club, they also engaged the services of D.N. Preet to argue the case against conviction, the appeal against conviction. In August 1954, the Fajar trial went to court. After a 3-day hearing, the Fajar 8 were acquitted. On the following month, in September 1954, D.N. Preet returned to argue the appeal against conviction in respect of the 7 convicted students from the Chinese middle schools. That appeal, however, was dismissed. It is to be noted that the local junior council, acting for the Fajar 8 as well as for the Chinese middle school students, was none other than Lee Kuan Yew himself, who was then had just returned from the United Kingdom and had just begun his practice in law in 1950. He was assisting D.N. Preet in both these cases. So between May to September 1954, the papers were full of news regarding these 2 major events and the support given by members of our public, parents, and the trade unions in sustaining the Chinese middle school students in the canteen at Chinese High School grounds in Bukit Timah Road. During these months, as a result of these activities and demonstrations, the political consciousness of the people went up, and a growing awareness and consciousness against the continued existence of British colonialism came to the fore. It was in the context of this mass enthusiasm and anti-colonial fervor that the PAP was launched in November 1954. The launching of the People's Action Party could not have taken place without the enthusiastic support and manpower from the University Socialist Club, the Chinese middle schools, and the trade unions. A fact which is so often ignored and neglected. The growth of the PAP as a mass party was due to the particular conditions under which it was formed, and to the support it managed to garner from a whole series of organizations and people. It was not the result of the organizing genius of a handful of superheroes acting the so-called moderate leadership of the PAP. This fact must be totally grasped to enable us to understand the genesis of our country's struggle for independence. It is important for us to understand this fundamental fact before we begin to understand how we come to where we are now. When many of the earlier leaders of what we have termed the Fajar Generation decided to throw off their coat and ties and enter the ranks of the anti-colonial struggle, they were mesmerized by a belief that they owe a duty to create and forge a new nation, and to create a society, a more just and equal society. That was the vision, and that was the credo, which led many of them to take this road. 50 years down the road, it is time for us to ask ourselves whether our society as a whole has moved anywhere nearer towards its overarching vision and credo. Or have we in fact moved further and further away from those visions which the Fajar Generation so passionately espoused and articulated in the heady days of the 1950s and 60s when they were young once. Thank you.
Before I was arrested in February 1963, Jinkui and a few other members of the Socialist Club came to see me and asked me what they can do when we all go into prison. Well, I told him that firstly, he has to be prepared to go to prison because the atmosphere then was a very precarious one for anyone who had the courage to come out. He said he was prepared and was determined to take the challenge. I was very impressed. Then he knew that the best way for him to serve our people is to go into the trade union. So after graduation, he sacrificed a good prospective job and went straight into the trade unions, where he was paid a measly sum. He became the best secretary of the Singapore Business Houses Employees Union, a union largely of English-educated workers. There, he fought for the workers' rights and helped to elevate their standard of living. He participated in the 1963 elections, nearly got in by a mere few hundred votes, but as expected, he was arrested together with scores of other candidates in that election. Even those without trade union background were arrested, and I remember welcoming the newly arrested people, scores upon scores of NANTA graduates. Now yesterday, I heard on the internet Dr. Tony Tan trying to relate terrorism with all those who were arrested. Now I challenge Dr. Tony Tan to categorically state that we are terrorists so that I have the opportunity to bring him to court and sue him for slander. Is Dr. Tony Tan implying that I, Dr. Po Su Kai, and many others are terrorists? Is he implying that Lee Mao Seng, Liu Sheng, and others are terrorists, that Said Jahari is a terrorist? Let him come out and say categorically, are we terrorists? Either he's an ignoramus or he's a blatant liar. In both cases, that is most unbecoming for a man of his position. The PAP has been using the ISA not for security reasons, but for suppressing legitimate political opposition. Batch after batch of detainees since 1963 to 1987 were launched by the PAP to what they call suppress, to nip in the bud any opposition, any dissident opposition arising in Singapore. That explains the death of political opposition until lately in the general elections. In the last general elections, we are happy to note that the new generation, the younger generation, did not have the baggage of terrorism, the white terrorism that PAP has launched by Sir Kompo. At least now they are all courageous to stand up and speak. And it's a very good sign that harbors very good prospect for the future of Singapore. We depend upon the young people to come up and turn a new leaf in the political history of Singapore. Jinkui, as you know, was detained twice, first in 1963 for 3 years, subsequently in 1977 for another period of time. The 1977 batch were composed of mainly doctors, lawyers, journalists, and whatnot. Are they all terrorists? We asked Dr. Tony Tan. One of them is now important member at the Singapore SMU. Are they all terrorists? Now, Jin Kui's, like all the other detainees of his batch in 1977, was subjected to physical and mental torture. And he related that in his poetry, the one which is now circulated among you. I think remembering Jin Kui reminds us of the urgency of having a commission of inquiry upon the treatment and the reasons for the arrest of detainees. This is important because many of us are all very old, and we would like to have the privilege of giving evidence in this commission of inquiry. More importantly, the main culprit, Lee Kuan Yew, is still alive, and hopefully he's lucid enough to defend himself. So a commission of inquiry is not a vilification or a vendetta. If anything, it's just a verification of the truth. It is a vindication of the victims. And it is a fact, it is to reveal all the facts so that objective historians can rewrite history. It's not for us to rewrite history. We only give you the facts. It's for objective historians to rewrite history, not dependent upon the lies that are churned out by the Ministry of Home Affairs. You all have read a lot about ill treatment of political detainees. Tan Jin Kui just now over the YouTube has revealed something. Now, few other books have revealed a great deal of details. Teo Solan's book, Beyond the Blue Gate, has given you a very detailed description of the treatment in the holding center. Another one is Mr. Francis Xiao's book, To Catch a Tatar. And recently on the YouTube, I've read about this Dr. Ang Chi Chai, an orthopedic surgeon who has told you about how she was treated when she was arrested in 1977. As you know, Ang Chi Chai now is in England. So a commission of inquiry will have to open up everything for public scrutiny. Here in Singapore, we have a beautiful Parliament House where all the tourists can go and admire. But many of our citizens do not realize that an essential part of the parliamentary system are the political prisons. The whereabouts are not even known to our citizens, let alone the atrocities that were perpetrated inside there. We all know about the atrocities against the Arab prisoners in Abu Ghraib and the Guantanamo prisons in the United States. But we are not aware of the similar atrocities that were carried out against political detainees in Singapore. The Amnesty International has recorded all this, and the Amnesty International has emphasized that electrical shocks have been applied to detainees, even to women detainees. The Commission of Inquiry will reveal all these facts to all and sundry, and the world should know how Lee Kuan Yew has held on to power for the last 50 years, not by the ballot, but the brutality of the special branch. After the last general elections, Lee Hsien Loong said nothing is sacrosanct and must be reviewed and examined. But he's significantly silent on the Internal Security Act. Why is he so quiet on whether he wants to review the Internal Security Act? Is he holding that as a reserve power to safeguard the PAP's power position? Now, Tan Jin Kui has done research in the secret archives in a British museum. And in one of his discoveries, he revealed that in 1961, when the Barisan Socialist was formed, Lee Kuan Yew suggested to the High Commissioner in Singapore, Lord Selkirk, that he, Lee Kuan Yew, would instigate riots and disorder so as to give the British an excuse to ban the Constitution and do away with elections. This is a fact which we have revealed in the book, The Fajar Generation. If it's not true, then Lee Kuan Yew could sue us for being lied. It's all in the record. Now, we must know the past so that we can take precautions against these things happening again in the future. History tends to repeat itself. If the PAP were to face a sure defeat in the general elections, would they try to launch another cold store operation to vanquish the opposition before staging another snap election, as they did in 1963? Can they not create some kind of artificial situation like riots, instigate, provoke riots, so that they give them an excuse to give them an excuse to use the ISA again to launch a massive arrest of political opposition? It is not beyond that, considering the track record. They talk as though they have the right to be in power for another 30 years. So it is important that all of us are aware of what has happened before, so that we can take precautions against this happening again in the future. Now, Jin Kui has devoted his life to revealing the truth so that our people are aware of the truth about the democratic freedom in Singapore. In a country where political dissent can mean a double decade or more of detention without trial, the democracy that Lee Kuan Yew brags about is nothing but a cruel and inhuman deception, evidence of the vindictiveness and of a tyrant that is masquerading as a democrat. Jin Kui has also recorded for historical purposes all the experiences of political detainees. The book on Comet in the Sky, the book on My Thoughts Are Free, and then the subsequent book on May 13 generation and the Fajar Generation. All these are valuable references for human rights students in Singapore. Even in the last days of his life, he has traveled to KL and to Penang to launch the book, The May 13 Revolution, which is a very important record of the contributions of the Chinese school students in our anti-colonial struggle. The subsequent suppression of this generation of political activists represents a very massive and shameful betrayal by the PAP of this group of political activities which were responsible for bringing the PAP into power in the first place. Thank you.
Who introduced Lee Kuan Yew to you guys? I mean,
Hello?
how do you get to know Lee Kuan Yew? And
How I came to Lee Kuan Yew? Yeah. When we formed the Socialist Club, Lee Kuan Yew wanted to know us. We didn't want to know him. So he approached Woodhull. Woodhull was the previous publication secretary for the first term. What we started first term. When he graduated, he made friends with Kuan Yew, and Kuan Yew arranged for him to work in the naval base. You understand? Okay. So Kuan Yew asked him to approach me whether I will appoint Kuan Yew as the legal advisor. And of course, being a young man, not knowing very much, my first question was, hey, how much does he want? We don't have money, you know. He told me, no, free. So I said, if it is free, I don't mind. He can be my legal advisor, I don't mind. But we never made use of him because we were students, there was no legal matters to deal with. But when the Fajar case came up, we didn't want him. We didn't want him. Not because we don't like him, but he was too young. And we wanted a more senior lawyer. So we went to see David Marshall. You see? And David Marshall, for some reason, thinks we are communists. So I walked out. You know? He fell for the British Straits Times propaganda that all these guys are communists. So when he says you are communist, I say it's no use asking him. So we walked out. And when we walked out, Kuan Yew walked in. So Kuan Yew was very happy. He was waiting on the phone. Buddha tells me, this fellow was waiting on the phone for your phone call. We were the one who introduced Kuan Yew to the Chinese Middle School Students Union. Kuan Yew had came to know of two girls in the Middle School Students Union whom he has somebody has told him from the special branch that their boyfriends have connection with the MCP. The left wing in the PAP, since it's the PAP's formation, has stuck loyally to the PAP. And this group, unhappy with PAP not being democratic, there's no intra-party democracy, no transparency, everything is just decided by one or two people and they're pushed through, you know. This group finally wanted Kuan Yew to explain the terms of merger. And they want to go in to the PAP in earlier part, there was a group that tried to move in 1957, okay? And that was arrested. The whole lot was arrested. Chinju and about 5 of them were arrested and put in prison. Now the latter part, after Anson, you know, they tried the same thing, but it wasn't to control the Central Committee. It was just to tell Kuan Yew, look, listen to the people. You have lost Hong Lim. You have lost Hong Lim because Oing Wan stood on this platform. Now Marshall is standing on the same platform. You better change. Better listen to the people and be more democratic, and we will still support you. So if you look at the statement made by the 6 trade unionists just 1 week before Anson by-election, they're telling Kuan Yew the same thing. We will support you, but you must change. You understand? But Kuan Yew won't change. And therefore, he kicked them out. When Singapore entered Malaysia, Tunku sent his secretary, UMNO secretary, to Geylang to build up the Malay UMNO in Kampong Melayu. See? And the first thing Kuan Yew did was to call him a mad mullah. He was using terms like that. They are mad mullahs. Mad. They are mullahs and they are mad. And that is to provoke them. And so, during they of course replied, they are unhappy. You call them that, they are unhappy. Because they were taking Malay line the same as in Kuala Lumpur. You see, in a Chinese city. And Kuan Yew was here hitting at them. Okay? And so when the Prophet Muhammad's day, there was a demonstration. From all accounts, the demonstration was peaceful until it reached Kalang, near the, Singapore, the Kalang, Lavender Street, Kalang area, and somebody threw a bottle from upstairs, the shop house. Now who did it? Nobody knows. but you can be sure that those flats are all occupied by Chinese. And that, according to some sources, was a start. There's only one source, one explanation of the start of the rioting by the Malays. So, in my opinion, it's provoked. And who could have provoked it? I mean, I suspect it that way. In fact, when Said Zahari was asked that same question in a prison, the special branch went to ask him. He said, "What do you think?" And Said's answer was, "Both of them are in the wrong. You get Tunku and you get Kuan Yew and you bash their heads together." That was what Said told them. Okay? But he was playing on the communal line. The British calls it communal brinkmanship. Understand? PAP is non-communal. Malays can enter, Chinese can enter, Indians can enter. But this policy of provoking, okay, instead of being friends, he wants to provoke so that he gets a Chinese support behind him. And which was helped, of course, by the Indonesian confrontation. Yeah, but he got the Chinese support behind him after that. Before that, he had no Chinese support. None. Oh, the splitting was very obvious. We told Kuan Yew, you're going to split. Because Kuan Yew wants to come in and wants to be number one. So he, instead of telling the Tunku, look, we are all can work together, he says, these guys are communists, we are not communists, and therefore I want to be number one. And there's Tan Siew Sin to contend with, so he couldn't push Tan Siew Sin out. So we told him that. He couldn't push Tan Siew Sin out. But he thinks, he tells me, when I go in, I turn the Tunku down my little finger. He told me that in the assembly, in the lobby. I had a good laugh, because he was so confident that he can turn the Malays around their little finger. It's a silly idea. And so what he did was, he went on the communal line. He went on the communal line, and it's all right. Although the PAP is non-communal, he took a very communal line. Lee Kuan Yew regarded Lim Chin Siong as his enemy number one, right from the first day. Enemy number one. So he is afraid of Chin Siong. If Chin Siong comes to power, I think you have more rights. There will be no Internal Security Act, but basically you will be running a capitalist system, but more in favor of the workers. You won't be allowing the big shots to call the game. It's like today you see the Chinese workers on strike. I mean, where does the government stand? The government stands on the side of the SMRT, or the government stands neutral, or the government stands on the side of the workers. The workers got legitimate complaints. So you cannot stand on the side of the management and then sentence the workers to prison and banish them. You must settle the issue. Reforming PAP under Kuan Yew is not possible. But after Kuan Yew's death, there may be a fight within, at the moment, 3 factions in the PAP. 3 factions of PAP. I think they will fight. So we don't know. We have to watch. Because how they perform will also mean how much support they can get from the population. You see? PAP now becomes, at one time it was, well, I say it, what do I care, whatever you say. Kuan Yew was saying, I don't care. So what? But now it cannot be like that. When they go for election, they have to listen. So there will be a change. It's my view. There are 3 factions. Apparently you can see that there's the army faction, there's people know about the army faction, there's the NTUC faction, and then there's another faction. So it's only it may not happen because they will have to readjust. But then the fact that there are three factions means there is some split. There's not a monolithic party all obeying Kuan Yew like before. Okay?
Ladies and gentlemen, the Fajar Generation.
I've mentioned in my talk, my short speech, that the relevance of socialism is more marked today than 50 years ago, especially with the financial crisis breaking out in the citadel of capitalism, that's the United States of America. There is a crisis in capitalism today, and Obama tries to solve the problem by working within the system. The stimulus package has not produced any positive results, even to the extent of not increasing unemployment rate. The difference between Obama's package and the Chinese stimulus package is very radically different. The Chinese stimulus package is aimed at stimulating internal consumption. It is a stimulus on the social, the educational, and health services, including infrastructure. Now, this has increased the consumption of the Chinese population. However, it does not address the inequality and equal distribution of wealth. And this is something we can all worry about. Because if this problem is not solved, it will have far-reaching socio-economic consequences, not only in China, but throughout the world. And socialists everywhere must be reserved studying the Chinese model, whether it is relevant or applicable to underdeveloped countries all over the world. While we embark on the road to socialism, we have to study very carefully the lessons and the faults of other people taking the socialist road. China today, the so-called socialism with Chinese characteristics, is in fact national capitalism with some socialist restraints. It is not socialism at all. And we should wonder whether or not this is the road that developed countries should take. We have to learn very carefully from the faults and the problems faced by the Chinese people today. Now, socialism for us is a dream. For those who think we can achieve socialism in 100 years, I think they are out of touch of reality. When Mao Zedong was asked how long will China take to become a socialist country, he said 5 to 10 generations. I think now they are going to take more than 10 generations. So these are lessons we all have to learn. But we must, human beings who are now able to fly to the moon, should deserve a kind of a society, a socio-economic society, which is more worthy of human beings. Not a rat race that we all have to run like hell to keep to the same spot. We should have a society where development is based on the welfare of the people and not for the profit of a few individuals who own the means of production. This is the road that we have to take. And we must have the dream and inspiration to guide us along in our actions, in our thoughts. Without ideology, without ideal, we have no direction. how this election can be expressed depends upon the individual countries and the concrete situations that we have to develop. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Silan Pale. I'm a Singaporean activist of this generation today. And I'd like to start off by speaking on behalf of my current generation of local activists, that we greatly respect and honor the men sitting in front of us, and also the men and women that have suffered under the PAP regime, under the ISA back in 63 and even in 87 and even today. I would like to say that history has been written by people who have won only because they have cheated. If they want to call that a victory and feel proud of it, then that is their business. But I find no honor in a victory that is won by cheating. Through the abuse of power, through the abuse of the law, and through the complete control of the media. And that is why I reiterate that the current government in Singapore, the PAP government, is an illegitimate government. I'd like to say that for us, the current generation activists, some of us are here today, we bear in mind some of the ideas of people before us, and I'd like to quote Dr. Lee Kuan Yew in saying that we will never concede. Bitter sacrifice strengthens bold resolve. We are still colonized in Singapore, previously by white men and now by men in white.
The question is this. First, there's a panel. Do the panelists think that there is in Singapore an urgent need for another Fajar generation? And if there's such a need, will there be one? Thank you.
Just remove the ISA and the whole generation of India. When Lee Kuan Yew came to the power, he boasted that he will make no stones unturned to remake society. So what we see is just little stones and pebbles being merrily kicked about, raising so much dust and din, but the big boulders of repression are still there. The press, the media, the ISA, the right to freedom of thought, expression, organization are all still there. Just remove all this, and a new generation of Fajar Generation will emerge.
For this wonderful book. I'm Su Chen, Christine Lim. I'd like to ask a question that might be of help to some younger people who might want to follow your footsteps. If, when you were arrested and you were in solitary confinement, and you just said that it was one of the most, terrible, terrible torture, how did you all keep yourself sane and keep your intellect? Now that will be a great help if you tell us that.
Well, my experience is this. I keep my mind focused on what is right and what is wrong. I keep my mind focused on my own conscience and the reasons why I was arrested and why I have to persist in this struggle. I try to project my mind out of the prison cell. Walls, iron bars cannot confine a mind of a man or a woman. They can only confine our bodies, but not our spirit. And we must free our spirit from this artificial confinement. That is how we keep ourselves safe. I think no man is born a tyrant. He is acquired through power, unrestricted power, abuse leading to corruption of power. Mr. Lee Kuan Yew has been quoted to say, "If people are not afraid of me, then I'm nothing."
Now I leave it to psychiatrists to decide whether a man who feels secure only when he makes everybody insecure is fit to wield a draconian law as the ISA, which gives him arbitrary power of arrest for indefinite period.
I always believe because it's a vacuum in Singapore.
That's right.
Yeah, I'm glad you.
Very good. Very good.
Thank you.
And I read already.